Welcome to Devotionary, where we make the Bible accessible and applicable. God has a way of doing things, and He fully expects His people to follow His lead. In accomplishing His will, He rarely requires our opinion or advice. He doesn't seek our viewpoint or give us the option of replacing His divine plan with one of our own. But that doesn't stop us from trying. And in the book of Deuteronomy, we have plenty of examples of Moses and the people of Israel attempting to help God out by opting for their own strategies in place of His. But this Plan B tactic rarely works out. We may not understand or even like what God has told us to do, but there's never a case where our preferred option will produce better results. It just won't happen. A big part of being a child of God is learning to obey Him, which requires that we trust Him. We have to believe that what He is telling us to do will be for our good, whether we understand it or not. He knows what He's doing. And Moses and the people of Israel were going to learn that lesson time and time again as they began their conquest of Canaan. In fact, it would start before they ever entered the land. Then we turned and went up the way to Bashan. And Og, the king of Bashan, came out against us, he and all his people, to battle at Edrei. But the Lord said to me, "Do not fear him, for I have given him and all his people and his land into your hand, and you shall do to him as you did to Sihon, the king of the Amorites who lived at Heshbon." So the Lord our God gave into our hand Og also, the king of Bashan, and all his people, and we struck him down until he had no survivor left. And we took all his cities at that time. There was not a city that we did not take from them, 60 cities, the whole region of Argob, the kingdom of Og and Bashan. All these were cities fortified with high walls, gates, and bars, besides very many unwalled villages. And we devoted them to destruction, as we did to Sihon, the king of Heshbon, devoting to destruction every city, men, women, and children. But all the livestock and the spoil of the cities we took as our plunder. So we took the land at that time out of the hand of the 2 kings of the Amorites, who were beyond the Jordan, from the valley of the Arnon to Mount Hermon. The Sidonians call Hermon Sirion, while the Amorites call it Senir. All the cities of the tableland, and all Gilead and all Bashan, as far as Selecah and Edrei, cities of the kingdom of Og and Bashan. For only Og the king of Bashan was left of the remnant of the Rephaim. Behold, his bed was a bed of iron. Is it not in Rabbah of the Ammonites? 9 cubits was its length, and 4 cubits its breadth, according to the common cubit. Deuteronomy 3, verses 1 through 11. This chapter continues Moses' description of the conquest of the Transjordan region, located east of the Jordan River, just outside the land of Canaan. While the Israelites had their eyes set on the land west of the Jordan, God was leading them to remove any and all enemies on the other side of the river who might pose a future threat to their safety. This included the people living in Bashan. As we saw in yesterday's episode, God's promise to Abraham had been much more extensive in terms of territorial boundaries. "To your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites." Genesis 15, 18 through 21. God had meant for Israel to fill the land from the brook of Egypt, a small wadi on the eastern border of Egypt, all the way to the Euphrates. He had big plans for His chosen people, and during the days of King David, Israel saw this promise partially fulfilled. David was able to extend the boundaries of Israel until it included virtually all of the land God had promised to Abraham, but it would not remain theirs for long. Disobedience on the part of Solomon, David's son and successor, would cause God to split the kingdom in half, and it would never be restored to its former glory. But there's a line in these opening verses of chapter 3 that speaks volumes regarding God's power and man's unwillingness or inability to trust in that power. After God commanded Moses to take the land belonging to Og, the king of Bashan, the people of Israel obeyed and were given a great victory over their enemies. They were able to destroy every city, town, and small village within the land. But notice how Moses describes their victory. "And we took all his cities at that time. There was not a city that we did not take from them. 60 cities, the whole region of Argob, the kingdom of Og and Bashan. All these were fortified cities with high walls, gates, and bars, besides very many unwalled villages." Deuteronomy 3, verses 4 through 5. If you recall, the reason the people of Israel had failed to enter the land 40 years earlier was because the 12 spies had brought back disturbing news. They had reported that the land was rich in produce, but it was also defended by powerful armies who were housed in well-fortified cities. In fact, the people had responded to the news by saying, "Our brothers have made our hearts melt," saying, "The people are greater and taller than we. The cities are great and fortified up to heaven." Deuteronomy 1 verse 28. And even when God assured them of certain victory, they had refused to believe. Moses had pleaded with them to trust God. "Do not be in dread or afraid of them. The Lord your God who goes before you will himself fight for you, just as he did for you in Egypt before your eyes, and in the wilderness, where you have seen how the Lord your God carried you, as a man carries his son, all the way that you went until you came to this place." Deuteronomy 1, 29 through 31. But the words of Moses made no impact on the people. He summarized their response to his pleas by saying, "Yet in spite of this word, you did not believe the Lord your God." Deuteronomy 1:32. Their enemies were bigger than their God. The circumstances they faced were greater than the God they claimed to follow. And it didn't matter to them that he had freed them from slavery in Egypt and had faithfully guided them across the desert. When they had assessed their current situation, they had deemed their God incapable of fulfilling his promises to them. Now, 4 decades later, God was proving himself fully capable of defeating any and all enemies. The spies had been right. The cities were surrounded by high walls, but they proved to be no obstacle for God. He gave his chosen people victory over their enemies, allowing them to defeat what appeared to be more powerful armies and to destroy siege-proof cities. In fact, Moses states that there was not a city that we did not take from them. A total of 60 cities fell that day, and the people of Israel were able to take spoil from each and every one of them. And those resources they gathered would prove essential in supplying their future needs as they prepared their conquest of the land of Canaan. The victories God gave his people were necessary. Not only did the plunder provide the Israelites with plenty of food for the future, the land would house the future settlements of the tribes of Dan and Reuben, as well as the half-tribe of Manasseh. These battles were all part of God's plan for his people. And while we may find the description of Israel's complete annihilation of these people groups disturbing, there was a divine strategy taking place. As we saw, God had a reason for eliminating the nations that occupied the land, and Moses made that reason known to the people of Israel. "Because of the wickedness of these nations, the Lord your God is driving them out from before you." Deuteronomy 9, verse 5. God knew that these people, if allowed to remain in the land, would prove to be a constant threat to the people of Israel, not just militarily, but also morally. Their false religions and immoral behavior would tempt the Israelites to turn their backs on God. That's why God commanded his people to remove all the Canaanites from the land. But as we'll see, they would fail to do so. They would not fully comply with God's commands, and their failure to do so would play a huge part in their future demise as a nation.